Main text of Zhang Ailing's Half-Life Chapter 5. Today, Sunday, is Shijin's last day in Nanjing. His mother gently said to him, "You have to go see Dad today." Shijin was very reluctant to go to his father's small mansion. His mother didn't want him to go, but she felt that he hadn't been home for a year. Since all his relatives and friends knew that he was back, it would be a bit disrespectful not to go to his father's place. Shijin also knew that he had to go there, but he always liked to postpone it until the last minute. On this day, he went to the small mansion in the morning before his father went out. The atmosphere over there is much greater than here, and men are used as errands. A servant who came to open the door was a newcomer and did not recognize him. Shijin asked, "Master, are you up yet?" The man looked at him hesitantly and said, "I'll go take a look. What's your surname?" "Shijin," he said. "Just say that the second young master from my old mansion is here." The man asked him to sit down in the living room and report himself. The living room is full of mahogany furniture. Shijin's father was very fond of arty style. Antique porcelain was placed everywhere on the tables and tables, making people afraid of breaking valuable things with every move. Shijin didn't pay attention to anything else. There was a tray on the table with several business cards and invitations from guests scattered in it. Shijin picked it up and took a look. There was a pink wedding invitation, and the invitation was Mr. and Mrs. Shen Zhaotong. This shows that in the circle where his father interacted, people regarded his concubine as a wife. Zhaotong probably hadn't gotten up yet, and Shijin was sitting alone in the living room waiting. The morning sunlight shone in and shone on the sofa where he was sitting. The white cloth covering on the sofa is quite old, but it has been washed cleanly. Obviously, the housewife here is a diligent and thrifty person. At this time, she was returning from shopping at the small market. A maid was following behind her, carrying a basket for her. She was carrying a scale in her hand, walked past the door of the living room, opened a picture inside, and said with a smile, "Hey, the second young master is here. When did you come back to Nanjing?" Shijin never called her anything. He just stood up and said with a straight face, "I just came back 2 days ago. This concubine is already an old woman. My mother, although she was a prostitute in the past, she is now dressed very honestly, with her hair combed, wearing a half-used black kudzu sam, and her face is only lightly powdered. If she were a coquettish slut, Shijin would feel more at ease. But she was such a typical housewife, completely replacing Shijin's mother's position, so he always felt very unhappy every time he saw her. Comfortable. She always looked perfunctory when she saw him, but she did not lose her identity and her politeness. She turned around and called, "Li Sheng. Why don't you pour tea for the second young master?" Li Sheng replied from outside, "Pour it here." She nodded to Shijin and said with a smile, "Sit down for a while. Dad is coming down. Zhao Senior, come and call your brother, come." Her third child was coming downstairs carrying a school bag. She waved him over and said, "Call the second brother." The child and Shijin, my nephew, is about the same age. Shijin smiled and said, "How old are you?" The concubine smiled and said, "Second brother is asking you something. Tell me." Shijin said with a smile, "I remember he stutters a bit." The concubine smiled and said, "That's his brother. He is the third one. Last time you saw him, he was still holding him in your hands." Shijin said, "Children grow up so fast." The concubine said, "No." The concubine immediately took the child's hand and went out. She could be heard shouting from a distance, "Where is the driver? Ask him to take the young master to the school. He will be back soon. The master wants to sit down." She knew that their father and son were talking. It wouldn't last long, and she wouldn't have any confidant words, but she still took very careful precautions. Although she walked away, she sent her mother to sit in the main room. This old lady has been living with her daughter. Although her daughter has been completely transformed and has become a standard family member, the mother's aura of piety is still very strong. Shijin hated her even more than his concubine. She probably had some idea in mind, so she didn't come over to say hello to him. I heard her rustling down in the main room and saying to a little girl, "Xiaoxi, come here, Grandma will teach you how to fold tin foil." "Here, fold it like this, and then fold it like this. The paper folded ingots and she could hear the sound of the spindle being thrown into the basket. And of course she could hear the conversation in the guest room. Although she is old, her ears are probably fine. The ambush here has just been ranged. And there is a familiar hen on the stairs. Shijin's father came downstairs. Although my father's cough sounded familiar, my father himself was a bit unfamiliar. Shen Zhaotong walked in with his hands behind his back, and Shijin stood up and called Dad. Zhaotong nodded to him and said, "Sit down. When did you come back?" Shijin said, "You came back the day before yesterday." Zhaotong said, "There are a lot of rumors about this. What news did you hear in Shanghai?" Then he said, "Talk about the current situation." Shijin didn't admire his opinions at all. He was just an old-fashioned businessman, and his opinions were all heard from other businessmen. Otherwise they were just half as good as what appeared in the newspapers. After Zhaotong analyzed the major national events one by one, he was silent for a while. He had never looked at Shijin's face, but then he suddenly said, "Why do you get such a tan?" Shijin smiled and said, "It's probably because I went hiking in the mountains every day to tan in the past 2 days since I came back." "Zhaotong, did you come back from leave this time?" Shijin said, "You didn't ask for leave. This double 10th-day holiday happened to fall on Saturday and Sunday, so there were several days." Zhaotong never asked him much about it. His career, because there was a huge rift between father and son, just because of his career issue. So when he said this, Zhaotong felt a taboo, and immediately changed the subject and said, "My uncle is dead. Do you know?" Shijin was originally going to say, "I heard what Mom said," but he changed it at the last moment. "Chang, I heard what was said." There were a few remaining elders among their relatives, and Zhaotong was in awe of them. During the Chinese New Year, he would go to these families to pay New Year greetings, and he would always go with Shijin's mother, even though the couple rarely saw each other. Of course, it would be absolutely impossible for both Li and Ying to go out together. Now all these elders have passed away, leaving only this uncle, who is also dead. From now on, Zhaotong will never go out with his wife to pay New Year's greetings. Zhaotong talked about how her great-uncle had suffered a stroke, and said, "It was so fast." Zhaotong himself also suffered from a serious problem of high blood pressure. When he mentioned his great-uncle, he couldn't help but think of himself. He was silent for a while and then said, "I don't know where the prescription doctor Liu prescribed for me has gone. I'm going to find it tomorrow and buy some to eat." Shijin said, "Why don't you look for it again?" "Dad, Dr. Liu, do you want to take a look?" Zhaotong has always been a bit shy about medical treatment, so he excused himself. "I don't know if this person is still in Nanjing or not." Shijin said, "Yes. He is the one who saw Xiao Jian's rash this time." Zhaotong said, "Oh, Xiao Jian has a rash." Shijin thought to himself, "We both live in Nanjing, but he wants to ask me, a person from Shanghai, these things. This shows that there is a gap between him and his family." Zhaotong said, "Xiao Jian is always sick, and I don't know if he can be raised well enough. When I see him, I think of your brother. It's been 6 years since your brother died." As he said this, tears suddenly flowed down his face. "Come." Shijin felt very shocked. When he came back this time, he saw that his mother was a little confused. He thought that his mother was old, and now his father was crying to him again. This was something that had never happened before. Was it also because of old age? "It has been 6 years since my brother died. When he died, my father was not so full of tears. Why is he so sad today? 6 years later, or maybe he feels that he is old. His brother died and he lost an arm, and his second son refused to cooperate with him. At this time, he misses the deceased, which is a kind of helpless longing for the living." Shijin remained silent. At this moment, he thought of countless things. How his father treated his mother, and his mother's pain cast a shadow over his childhood. He thought of all this too hard in his heart. The aunt shouted loudly from upstairs, "Mother Zhang, please answer the phone." She was calling Ma Zhang, but in fact she was calling the master directly. Her shouting like this reminded Shijin that he didn't have to feel sorry for his father. His father had a warm family of his own. Zhao Tong stood up and was about to go upstairs to answer the phone. Shijin said, "Dad, I'm leaving. I have something else to do." Zhao Tong paused and said, "Okay, you go." Shijin followed his father and walked out together. His concubine's mother smiled at him and said, "Second young master, why are you leaving? Aren't you going to eat here?" Zhao Tong said impatiently. He still has something to do. He walked to the stairs. He turned around, nodded to Shijin, and went upstairs. Shijin left. When he got home, his mother asked him, "What did Dad tell you?" Shijin only said, "Speaking of my great-uncle, he also has high blood pressure." Dad himself seems a little scared, Mrs. Shen said. "Yes, your father's problem is that he is afraid of stroke. If I hadn't cursed him, I would have been worried that if you didn't come back, I might not be able to see him anymore." Shijin thought to himself that his father must have thought the same way. "That's why I was so sad just now. This time when I returned to Nanjing, because Shu Hui was with me, my mother never had the chance to shed tears for him." Unexpectedly, his father cried to him. He asked his mother, "How is the family income?" Mrs. Shen said, "It's been pretty good. I always ask someone to deliver it every month, but don't say I'm cruel. I always think like this. What if your father dies one day? All his money is in the hands of that woman." Shijin said, "Then, Dad will always have an arrangement, and he will always be prepared for such a day." Mrs. Shen smiled bitterly and said, "But by then, he can't make the decision anymore. Everything is in the hands of others, and it's even difficult for us to meet him. I don't necessarily run away like Kenzumai as a filial piety." Shijin also knew that his mother was not overly worried. This kind of incident often happens among relatives. The master died at the concubine's place. The concubine wanted to carry the body back, but the other party refused to carry it. The whole sky was full of noise. As a result, the mansion had to arrange a separate mourning hall, even if there was no coffin. Treat funerals. This is still a trivial matter, but in the future this property issue will really be a headache. I hope he already has the ability to support his mother, sister-in-law and nephew by then, so he doesn't have to compete with others for the family property. Although he had this intention, he was unwilling to comfort his mother with empty words. So he only mechanically comforted him by saying, "We don't want to worry unfoundedly, because this was his last day at home, Mrs. Shen also wanted everyone to be happy. I'm happy, so I won't mention these." He left by car tonight and accompanied Shu Hui to visit to places during the day. He went home in the afternoon and had dinner early. The eldest mistress hugged Xiao Jian and said with a smile, "We have just become acquainted with the second uncle, but he has to leave again. Next time the second uncle comes back, he will have to admit his child again." Mrs. Shen thought, when he comes back, he will have to be separated again. In a year and a half, the child will have to be born again. She thought like this. Her eye circles turned red, and she forced a smile, and said, "Xiao Jian, are you going to Shanghai with your second uncle? Are you going?" The eldest mistress also he said, "Hello Shanghai. Are you going to go with your second uncle?" He pressed the question, but Xiao Jian just crawled into the arms of the eldest mistress. The eldest mistress smiled and said, "No future. I still want a mother." Shijin and Shu Hui didn't bring much luggage when they came this time, but they came back fully loaded. In addition to the usual fruits and snacks, Mrs. Shen also bought 2 sweet-scented osmanthus ducks to bring to them. It was the season when sweet-scented osmanthus ducks were on the market. In addition, there was a large box of medicines that she forced Shijin to take injections. She originally wanted to send them to the station, but Shijin stopped her. Everyone in the family stood at the gate to see them off to the car. Mrs. Shen wiped her tears with a smile and told Shijin to write a letter as soon as he arrives. As soon as he got on the train, Shijin suddenly felt relaxed. They bought the Shanghai newspapers and read them on the bed. The train left Nanjing with a rumble, and the lights of the ancient city gradually faded away. People say the train of the times, and the metaphor really makes sense. The movement of the train does seem to pass through an era with great vigor. The atmosphere of the old times in Shijin's home, those tragic characters and those things that were filled with hatred were all left behind. The train rumbled away into the darkness. Shu Hui was sleeping in the bunk above, and Zhen was sleeping below. He saw one of Shu Hui's feet hanging on the edge of the bunk. There was a layer of yellow mud on the sole of the leather shoe, and there was a circle of hairy hair on the edge, grass clippings. That's what the so-called wandering clogs are, right? Zhen asked himself that he was not a good playmate. This time when I came back to Nanjing, I didn't know why. I was always so uneasy. No matter what I did, I always did it in a hurry, just to get away as soon as possible, as if he had another appointment. Arriving in Shanghai early the next morning, Zhen said, "Let's go directly to the factory." He wanted to go earlier so that he could see Manzin earlier without having to wait until dinner time. Shu Hui said, "How about the luggage?" Zhen said, "Take it with you first and put it in your office." He helped deliver the luggage to Shu Hui's office just to see Manzin. Shu Hui said, "Everything else doesn't matter. It's just these two ducks that are so oily that they have no place to put them. I think they have to be sent back. I'll make a quick trip. You can go first." Zhen took the bus to the factory alone. When he got off the bus, he looked at his watch and saw that it was just before 8 o'clock. Manzin must not have arrived yet. He just wandered around the station. It was still too early, and he knew that Manzin wouldn't come for a while. But as people were anxious and counting the time, Shu Hui might be coming soon. Wouldn't it be strange if Shu Hui was on the next bus and he jumped out, only to see that he, who had arrived 3/4 of an hour earlier, was still here? When he thought about it, he felt a thorn in his back and immediately turned around and walked towards the factory. There is a fruit stall near the bus stop. Zhen had eaten several oranges on the train just now and couldn't eat the fruits his family brought for them. But when he walked past the fruit stall, he stopped again, bought 2 oranges, peeled them out immediately, and stood there to relax. Eat slowly. After finishing the 2 oranges, he felt that he couldn't stay here any longer. Shu Hui was coming at any time. Moreover, how could Manzin not come at this time? If not, he had come a long time ago and was already in the office. He fell here and waited stupidly. Although this idea was extremely unreasonable, it made him immediately walk towards the factory. And this time he walked very quickly. On the way, he suddenly heard someone shouting from behind, "Hey!" When he turned around, it was Manzin. She was holding up her wind-blown hair with one hand and walking towards this side with a smile in the early morning sunshine. As soon as I saw her, I immediately felt my heart light up. She smiled and said, "You're back." Zhen said, "You're back." There was nothing funny about it, but both of them laughed in unison. Manzin asked again. "Just arrived," Zhen said. "Hey, I just got off the train." He didn't tell her where he was waiting for her. Manzin looked at his face carefully. Zhen touched his face a little awkwardly and said with a smile, "I washed my face half-heartedly on the train. I don't know if it's clean yet," Manzin said with a smile. "No." She looked at him again, smiled and said, "You are still like that. I always feel as if you will change your appearance once you go back," Zhen said with a smile. "Will you change your appearance after being away for so many days?" However, he himself felt that he had not only been away for a few days, but also came back from a very far-away place. Manzin said, "How is your mother? How is your family?" Zhen said, "Everything is fine." Manzin said, "Did they say anything when they saw your box?" Zhen said with a smile, "They didn't say anything." Manzin said with a smile, "Didn't you say you were good at packing boxes?" Zhen said with a smile, "No." While walking and talking, Zhen suddenly stopped and said, "Manzin." Seeing that he seemed to be in trouble, Manzin said, "What?" Zhen, however, remained silent again and continued to move forward. Walk? A series of disasters flashed through her mind. Something happened to his family. He was quitting his job, was engaged at home. He fell in love with someone, or someone from the past. A girlfriend whom I met again this time when I went back. She asked again. "What?" he said. "Nothing." Then she remained silent. Zhen said, "I didn't bring a raincoat, and it happened to rain again." Manzin said, "Oh, does it rain in Nanjing?" "It doesn't rain here," Zhen said. "It was okay, it just rained. One night. Anyway, We always go out during the day, but we also go out at night and on rainy days. He found that he was a little incoherent and stopped suddenly. Manzin was really a little anxious. She looked at him and said with a smile, "What's wrong with you?" Shijin said, "It's nothing. Manzin, I have something to tell you." Manzin said, "Just tell me." Shijin said, "I have a lot to say to you." In fact, he has already said it. She had heard it too. Her face was completely still, but he could tell she was extremely happy. Suddenly a kind of light shines in this world, and everything can be seen very clearly and accurately. He had never felt so clear-minded in his life. It was as if during an exam, when he sat down and looked at the questions, he knew all the answers. He felt so excited and at the same time felt a strange kind of calm. Manzin's expression suddenly changed. She smiled and called, "Good morning, Mr. Chen." She was the manager of the factory and walked past them. They have arrived at the factory gate. Manzin hurriedly said to Shijin, "I'm late today." "And you're late too. See you later." She hurried in and ran upstairs. Of course Shijin was happy, but after thinking over and over again all morning, his self-confidence gradually disappeared. He regretted that he had not been able to speak more clearly and get a clearer answer. He always thought that Manzin was very good to him, but when he thought about it now, he felt that Manzin was not very good at expressing her affection for him. It was either out of friendship or just her innocence. During the meal, the three of them were together again, and Manzin was still talking and laughing as usual, acting as if nothing had happened. According to Shijin's idea, even if she didn't love him, he had expressed that to her this morning, and she should have had some reaction. A little embarrassed, a little stiff. He didn't know how a woman behaved at such a time. What kind of attitude is there? But in short, you won't be completely nonchalant, right? If she loved him, her calmness would be even more amazing. Women are simply inhumane sometimes when they calm down, and he really knows how to act. I'm afraid every woman is an actress. After coming out of the restaurant, Shu Hui went to the cigarette shop to buy a pack of cigarettes. Shijin and Manzin stood a little further away waiting for him. Shijin said to her, "Manzin, what I said this morning was too unclear." However, he couldn't say it more clearly for a while. He lowered his head and looked at their shadows in the autumn sun. There were many fallen leaves on the roadside. He plucked them with his toes, picked out the largest brown leaf, and broke it with his foot, making a check sound. Manzin also avoided looking at him. She looked at Shu Hui's back and said, "Let's talk about it later. Come to my house later." That night he came to her house. She had something to do after work and went to a place to teach from 6 to 7 o'clock. After dinner, I have to go to another place to replenish books for my 2 children. Shijin was very familiar with her daily program. He could only go to her place during dinner, maybe talk to her for a few words. When he got it right, he rang the bell at the back door of Gu's house at 7:10. The Gu family has rented out the house downstairs, so a tenant's mother came to open the door. The maid was cooking, and she was so busy cooking and cooking, she just shouted upstairs, "Mrs. Gu, you have guests," and let Shijin go upstairs alone. Shijin had visited the house once last time when he took his friends to see the house, and he hadn't come here much since, because they had a lot of people at home, and when guests came, they would be silent and avoidant, which made him feel very uneasy. Especially those who children. Children are naturally active. There is never a moment of silence when they are ping dash pong dash pong. How can they be so silent? On this day, Shijin heard them talking and laughing upstairs on the stairs. An older child yelled, "It's so noisy. People are doing homework here." Books, rulers, and set squares were spread out on the table in front of him. Manzin's grandmother held a pair of chopsticks in her hand, pushed his things aside and said, "Hey, it's time to close the stall. We need to make room to put the dishes and chopsticks." The child just made his geometric triangle, not even looking up. When Manzin's grandmother turned around, she saw Shijin and said with a smile, "Hey, we have a visitor." Shijin said with a smile, "Old lady." He walked into the room and saw Manzin's mother cutting hair for the children. Hair. He nodded to her again and said, "Auntie, has Manzin come back?" Mrs. Gu smiled and said, "She is coming back soon. You sit down." I'll pour the tea. Shijin kept saying that he didn't dare. Mrs. Gu put down the scissors and went to pour tea. But a child cried out, "Mom, my neck is itching." Mrs. Gu said. The hair residue fell inside. She picked up his collar, turned it over, and brushed it carefully under the light. Whisked for a while. Mrs. Gu brought a broom and said, "Look at the hair here." Mrs. Gu quickly took the broom and said with a smile, "I'll do it. I'll do it." This is really called guests come to sweep the floor. Mrs. Gu took the broom and said with a smile, "I'll do it." The wife said, "Don't brush your hair. Let Mr. Shen sit over there." Mrs. Gu went to turn on the light and asked Shijin to go to the next room. She stood at the door, leaning on the broom handle, and asked him with a smile, "You are always busy, right?" After a few greetings, she said, "We're eating here today. There is nothing to eat. You are not welcome." Shijin, I was a little embarrassed to come here. Well, I was in a hurry to eat, but there was nothing I could do about it. Mrs. Gu immediately went downstairs to cook. She had to add food at the last minute and was busy again. Shijin stood alone in front of the window and looked into the alley, but he didn't see Manzin coming back. He knew that Manzin lived in this room, but the room was full of other people's things, including her mother's sewing basket, glasses case, and children's basketball shoes. An enlarged photo of her father hangs on the wall. There was one of her sweaters lying on one of the beds, which must have been her bed. Her room is like a boarding house with no personality. It seemed that the only things that really belonged to her were the books on the bookshelf. There are magazines, novels, translated novels, and the textbooks she read in school, English readers with the spines peeled off. Shijin looked at them one by one, and there were many that he had not read before, but he felt that they were all his books because they were hers. "Manzin is back." She walked in and said with a smile, "Have you been here for a while?" Shijin said with a smile, "Not long." Manzin put down the leather bag and books in her hands. The air between the two of them was a bit strange today. It seemed as if her every move was being watched closely. Blushing, she walked to the full-length mirror to straighten her hair, straighten her clothes, and said, "The tram was really crowded today. So crowded that people were out of shape and their socks were soiled." Shijin also came to take a photo. He looked in the mirror and said with a smile, "Look, I went to Nanjing. Did I get tanned?" He stood behind Manzin and looked in the mirror. He stood too close and couldn't tell whether his face was tanned, but saw that Manzin's face was red. Manzin looked at him perfunctorily and said, "It's always like this when you're exposed to the sun. It turns red at first, and it takes 2 days to turn black." When she said this, Shijin realized that he was also blushing. Manzin leaned over to check her socks and suddenly made a sound. "It's broken." They were all squeezed into the tram, so it doesn't count. She took out another pair of socks from the drawer and ran to the next room to change them, closed the door, leaving Shijin alone in the room. He was very uneasy, wondering if she was a little unhappy. He took out a book from the bookshelf and read it. As soon as he took it out, Manzin had already opened the door and smiled at him, "Come and eat." A round tabletop was full of people, and Manzin sat diagonally across from Shijin. Shijin felt that he would only eat at the same table with her today, but there would always be someone with him, and they were getting farther and farther away from her. He was really a little resentful. Mrs. Gu temporarily added some scrambled eggs with preserved eggs, and sent her children to buy some smoked fish sauce meat, and placed these dishes crowdedly on Shijin's side. Old Mrs. Gu was standing by, still telling her daughter-in-law from time to time, "Give him some soy sauce meat." Mrs. Gu smiled and said, "I'm afraid their new recruits don't like others to pick up the vegetables." The children all said nothing and ate very quickly. They finished the meal in a while and got off the table. They had always been somewhat hostile to Shijin. When Manzin saw their demeanor, she remembered that her sisters Fyungki Jong Yujin had come to their home in the past. Manzin herself was already 12 or 13 years old at that time, and she was very disgusted when she saw Yujin. Children of that age seem to still have the mentality of barbarians from the tribal era. They have a strong sense of family. They always think that others are foreign invaders coming to snatch their sisters and destroy their families. After dinner, Mrs. Gu wiped the table with a rag and asked Manzin, You'd better sit over there, Manzin said to Shijin. It's better to go over there and let them study here. The lights should be brighter. Manzin first poured a cup of tea for Shijin. After sitting down, she picked up the pair of stockings she had just changed out of and mended the torn areas. Shijin said, "Aren't you tired? You've been busy for a while since you came back." Manzin said, "If I just left it there and didn't do it, my mother would do it. She's tired too. She does everything from washing clothes to clothes." Shijin said, "You used to have a little eldest sister here, but now you don't need her." Manzin said, "Are you talking about a Bao? She has been dismissed a long time ago when you saw her because she couldn't find anything for the time being. She still helped us here." She lowered her head to darn her socks, and her hair was all spread out in front, revealing a soft patch of neck from the back. Shijin paced back and forth in the room, walked past her, and wanted to lean down and kiss her neck. But of course he didn't. He only touched her hair. Manzin didn't seem to notice, and still lowered his head to mend his socks. But with the needle in his hand, he didn't know where it went, and accidentally pricked his hand. She didn't say anything. She looked at a small drop of blood on her finger and wiped it on her handkerchief. Shijin always looked at the clock and said, "You have to go out soon." "Should I leave too?" He felt very disappointed. She was so busy that I had no chance to talk to her. I had to wait until Saturday, and today was only Monday. How to spend this long week? Manzin said, "You sit there for a while, and we'll walk together when I leave." Shijin suddenly came to his senses and said, "I'll take you there." "What car are you taking?" Manzin said, "There's not much road. I often go there." She was bringing a piece of thread to her mouth to bite it off, holding a thread between her teeth, but she smiled at Shijin. Shijin suddenly had endless hope again. Manzin stood up, looked in the mirror, put on a coat. Shijin held the book for her, and walked out together. Walking into the alley, Manzin remembered that her sister used to go for a walk with Yujin sometimes, also after dinner. Manzin and the children in the alley often followed them, making noises and nailing their heads. Although her sister and Yujin ignored them, they were embarrassed to show displeasure and always had a smile on their faces. Thinking about it now, she felt that she was really unforgivable, especially because the marriage between her sister and Yujin did not succeed in the end. Their sweet time did not last long, and it really didn't last long. Shijin said, "I'm so happy this morning." Manzin said with a smile, "Really? It seems like you've always been unhappy." Shijin said with a smile, "That was later. Later I thought I had misunderstood." "What do you mean?" Manzin didn't say anything. In the semi-darkness, I could only hear her chuckle. It was only then that Shijin felt relieved. He held her hand. Manzin said, "Your hands are so cold. Don't you feel cold?" Shijin said, "It's okay. It's not cold." Manzin said, "It was a little cold when I came back just now, and now it's cold again a little more." This conversation between them was completely affected by night. Under the night, he held her hand. Both of them had an indescribable feeling. Most of the shops on the road have closed. There was a big yellow moon opposite, hanging low over the street, exactly like a street lamp. The moon today is particularly human. It seemed to rise from the vast sea of people. Shijin said, "I can't speak well. I wish I could be like Shu Hui." Manzin said, "Shu Hui is not a bad person, but sometimes I hate him because he gives you an inferiority complex." Shijin said with a smile, "I admit that my inferiority complex is also a shortcoming of mine. I have too many shortcomings, but there are no benefits at all." Manzin said with a smile, "Really?" Shijin said, "Really, but now I think, maybe I have some benefits. Otherwise why would you be nice to me?" Manzin just smiled and said after a while, "You always say what you should say anyway." Shijin said, "Are you saying I'm a fake person?" Manzin said, "You said you can speak." Shijin said, "On the day I left, you came to our place." Later, Shu Hui's mother said, "I can't believe that an honest man like Shijin stole Shu Hui's girlfriend." Manzin said. He smiled and said, "Oh, I will never be embarrassed to go there again." Shijin said with a smile, "Then I regret telling you." Manzin said, Did she say it in front of Shu Hui? Zhen said he said. No, she was talking to Shu Hui's father behind her back, and I happened to hear it. I thought it was ridiculous. I always thought that love should be a natural thing. Why does it always feel like a war? It's all about grabbing or not. I don't think Shu Hui would rob me. Manzin smiled and said, you wouldn't rob him either, right? Zhen paused for a moment, then smiled and said, I think some women might like to be beaten to a bloody head, and you are the same as them. Manzin said with a smile, this is not a matter of fighting. Fortunately, Shu Hui doesn't like me, otherwise you would have stayed silent and gone far away. I will never know what happened. Zhen was speechless. Just now when he passed a fruit stall with lights on for the night market, he put down her hand, and now he held her hand tightly. But she broke away her hand and said with a smile, it's almost there, maybe you can see it from their windows. Zhen said, then take 2 steps back. They walked back again. Zhen said, if I knew you wanted me to snatch it, I would have snatched it from you no matter what. Manzin couldn't help but chuckle and said, who is going to snatch it from you? Zhen said, who is it anyway? Don't even think about it. Manzin said with a smile, you. I never know whether you are really stupid or pretending to be stupid. Zhen said, in the future, if you know that I am really stupid, you will regret it. Manzin said, Zhen said, I will not regret it unless you regret it. Zhen wanted to kiss her, but she turned his face away and only kissed her hair. He felt her trembling. He said, are you cold? She shook her head. She pulled up some of his sleeves and looked at his watch. Zhen asked, what time is it? Manzin answered after a while, 8:30. The time has arrived. Zhen immediately said, go quickly. I'll wait for you here. Manzin said, how can that be done? You can't stand here for an hour. Zhen said, I'll find a place to sit. A moment, we seem to have passed a cafe just now. Manzin said, there is a cafe, but it's too late. You should go back. Zhen said, just leave it alone. Come in quickly. He just urged her to go, but he forgot to let go of her hand, so she couldn't take 2 steps before she was pulled back again. They both laughed. Then she left, hurrying to ring the bell. When she rang the bell, Zhen had to run away. A big leaf fell from the sycamore tree beside the road, and like a bird, it flew over his head. It landed on the ground with 2 more checks and slid smoothly to the ground. Zhen walked slowly over and heard a man shouting, rickshaw, rickshaw. He shouted from the east end to the west end, but there was no answer. It can be seen that the road was quite deserted at this time. Zhen suddenly remembered that the primary school students she taught might be sick and unable to attend class, so she came out immediately and looked for him there. So he walked back and stood on the corner of the road for a while. The moon is getting higher and higher, and the moonlight shines on the ground. A rickshaw passed by in the distance, its swaying headlights creaking and squeaking, reminding people of the cold sound of the wind blowing on the swing ropes in the quiet of the night. Kiss her later anyway. Zhen walked over there again, looking for the small cafe. He recalled Manzin's contradictions. She was originally a very sophisticated person, but sometimes she seemed so naive, and sometimes she was so shy. He thought, maybe it's just because she likes me very much. He couldn't help but feel shaken. This was the first time he told a girl that he loved her. The person he loved happened to love him too, for the first time. It must be a very common thing for the person he loves to love him back. But for someone in his situation, it seems to be a once-in-a-lifetime coincidence. Zhen often hears people talk about how someone is in love. But for some reason, other people's things never remind him of him and Manzin. He believed that things between him and Manzin were different from others. It was different from everything that had happened in his own life. As the street turned a corner, I heard the sound of music, and the violin played dance music with Eastern European colors. I followed the sound of the music and found the small cafe, with red lights shining through. An old foreigner with a yellow beard pushed open the glass door and walked out. The glass door swung back and forth, sending out a burst of human voices and warm welcome. Zhen stood outside the door, feeling that it was impossible for him to walk into the crowd in such a mood. He is so happy. Too intense happiness and too intense sadness have the same thing. They both need to stay away from people. He could only linger on the street in the cold night and listen to music. I was waiting for her at the bus stop early this morning. Later I went to her house, but she still hadn't come back, so he was waiting for her in her room again. Now I'm waiting for her here again. He once told her that when he was studying in school, he was particularly happy on Saturday because he was looking forward to Sunday. He didn't know that the happiest time between him and her would be spent in anticipation, and their Sundays would never dawn.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.